Once again, it's time for Tales from the Garage.
Okay, Tales from the Garage number 2. What can I say? I'm actually here, not much preparation. I was going to do this very quickly and off the cuff, and what happens is things come up, and it's like, oh, I don't have this, oh, I don't have that. So, what should have been a very quick thing, me coming out here to my garage later at night, actually, than I'm usually here. So you may have the rare instance of potentially hearing a car door slamming in my shared driveway, maybe even the sound of footsteps above me. But probably that wouldn't come out, fairly subtle. I like filming out here. I don't have the microphone problems that I have in my main living room, my bedroom. And filming out here is kind of weird. But it's a very important place to me. As I mentioned in my previous videos, there's no windows here. There's no clocks. I have a computer here, but I don't really go on the internet from here. So I can't see if I'm getting emails or not. I could potentially, but then I'd have to start up a whole bunch of things that I don't normally start up. The computer I have here is basically for recording my music and for running programs. It's an old Windows 7 computer. It doesn't run, it runs a lot of older programs that I need to do things like create CD booklets and old software that I've had for years that I've used that all of a sudden doesn't work in my Windows 10 computer in my main living area. So, I'm going to, these videos are not going to be a lot different than my others. Except maybe I feel different when I'm out here for some reason. It's kind of like a second home almost, like I have two homes, This is very, it's attached to my condo, but it's very much separated. There's not even a window looking into the condo. And for most folks that live here in this complex, they park their cars here. And the only other people that I've seen a couple people use their garages for storage. I'm convinced there might be people that live here possibly that sell things maybe on eBay or something. I see one guy that lives across the street from me is, he's bringing stuff in and out of his garage. So I think he might be selling things. I'm not sure. 95% of the people that have a garage here use it to park their car, which I never have since I moved here. Having a small place, I really couldn't have moved in here if I had to use this for a garage. I needed this for what you see here, the mess that you see here. I gotta make some noise here, the instruments and just the storage. I have a lot of records in here in bins. I have instruments in here that would otherwise be in my living room. Storage in the bins of a lot of percussion instruments. And in future videos, I'm gonna, like, for instance, this, I can't see it, can you see it? This big black thing there. That is one of many bins that I have that store percussion instruments, small percussion instruments. I got a few sitting on top. Just like a drum, like this. I like this one. It's very high pitch. It's made out of clay, and unfortunately, probably, I'm guessing some kind of animal skin. This was actually, I think, an African import, but it has a nice, sharp pitch to it. Things like this, I don't have the scraper for it to play now, and this thing is just filled. I'm gonna go into those bins and show those too as well. But I'm here, not that anybody is really going to see this. It's nice that I have as many subscribers as I do to my channel, but I'm not fooling myself. I know they're here for the music I post in terms of the obscure and out-of-print albums that I put up, because I know my own personal videos, such as this one, get very few views compared to, I mean, after a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, whatever, I might have 50 views on a personal video that I make, versus anywhere from like 400 to 1,500 plays of albums that I post up. So I know most of the people, and I get a lot of nice comments, from the people. I'll say, oh, thanks for putting these albums up. And I've only had one instance where an artist actually asked me to take an album down. And I've had copyright notices, but not copyright strikes. There's a fine art to deciding what gets posted up. And I've learned that even if an album is out of print and you post it, you can still get copyright strikes from any number of places if the artist doesn't want you to put it up. In a lot of cases, I put up albums by artists that are no longer alive. But also I noticed standards, being into jazz, a lot of standards, the composers own the copyright to them, and they'll get you for that. They don't, for whatever reason, don't want any version of their songs out there for, on YouTube to be played. So initially, at one point, I had done a Dave Brubeck video, and I just had his music playing in the background, and I thought I had covered my butt, but I didn't. There was, Dave Brubeck did write a lot of originals, but also played a lot of standards and covers, and I got a copyright strike on this really long video that I put up, and I just took the whole video down. It was like an hour and a half video that I did on him, and I had to start from scratch and leave that track out. Some old jazz standard. So they'll what they'll do is they'll wipe out the audio portion of the track for the entire length of that song, and in a lot of cases, a lot longer than the length of that song. So I've got copyright notices. So someday, if I'm not here, it could be that I've actually got copyright strikes. I mean, I just take the stuff down, but sometimes that doesn't float. So if I ever have to go away, I do have a second channel that I don't really use much anymore, but I was going to clear it out, but then thought, well, maybe I'll save it. Maybe I'll save it. I don't want to just put my videos on there, and because there's like no subscribers on there. But if something ever happens to this channel because of copyright stuff, I'll probably end up there, at least with my personal videos. So I'm here to talk about this. It's a new CD that I put out. And speaking of copyright strikes, if everything has been processed correctly, I should actually get a copyright strike for this video, because I'm playing the CD in the background, and to what extent you can pick up on it, I'm not sure. It's called Two Views, and there's quite a lot of reasons it could be called that, as well as anything you'd want to read into it. But mostly what it is it's two very long pieces. One piece is 27.5 minutes long, and the other piece is about 24.5 minutes long. And so it's essentially two very different pieces, hence Two Views. One of them was my first experiment in working with virtual instruments in software. The first and only time that I've ever released something, or even the first time I've ever done it, where I recorded a piece that I wrote strictly by typing notes in the computer and not hands on a keyboard or a guitar or anything. It's not something I'm going to do in the future, not for an entire 27.5-minute piece. It took me about 2 years to do. I don't read music, so it was really hard. Thankfully, the way the program works is if you read music, you can just use your mouse and click on notes and enter the duration of the note on your standard musical staff. If you don't read music, which I don't, there's a second version. It's still on a musical staff, but you can just plop the notes on the staff and then slide them up and down depending on whether you like the sound of it or not. So it's just visually slightly different. You're still on a musical staff, but instead of the notes coming out like quarter notes or whole notes, you've actually got a little square, and you can take your mouse and drag the note if you want it to sound out louder. So if you just want a sharp, short note, you would just leave the little dot where it is. And if you don't like that particular note, you want to change it, you can just slide the dot up. If you want to make a chord, you put another note under it and another note under it, so and so. And then you slide each individual little dot depending on how long you want it to hold out. Whole note, quarter notes, whatever. If you wanted to hold out for an hour, you could just drag it for an hour. Not that I have anything like that. But it's a very long process. Actually, it takes longer to do that than it would to, sit on a keyboard and play all the parts. Very long process. It took about 2 years from the time I started. I did have periods where I wasn't working on it. Periods where I thought it would never get done. And I got so exhausted by it, I did put it down for a while. And I started working on recording other pieces with live instruments, nothing that I finished. But then after about a month of doing that with the live instruments, I went back and said, well, wait a minute, I think I was almost finished with this. And sure enough, I looked at what I had because I had done it in so many different pieces. I had like 8 or 9 different pieces, different sections to the piece, that, when I got in there and I looked back at it, I'm like, well, I was crazy to stop when I did because I had 90, maybe even 92 or 3% done. And I didn't use I had maybe 9 different sections. I ended up using 7. So there's 7 distinct sections to the first piece. And those were all created completely separately. And the whole thing is 27.5 minutes. But there was a lot of work. And I did finish it late in July, and I'm kind of happy with the results. I had a concept for the piece, which I call Ghost Orchestra, and I was only going to use orchestral sounds, no instruments that I actually play. So there's a lot of wind instruments, flutes and bassoons, and strings and plucked strings. And whole orchestra string sections and some horn sections as well, and no drums at all, no drum sounds. I really, for some reason, have something against using drum samples. I prefer all my drum sounds to actually be organic, real drum sounds from percussion instruments. Not that this piece needed drums. There was never a drum concept to it anyway. But it's playing in the background to what extent you can hear it. I'm including links, so you can actually hear the whole album right on YouTube. I do sell these through CD Baby, and CD Baby distributes it all over the place, to iTunes, to Amazon, and for some reason, Amazon this time, unlike my other CDs, is not selling the physical CD, only the downloads. I don't know why, but when I went there, they had this available by download but not by CD, whereas my earlier things they listed both. I don't know why they're not selling the CD. So right now, for all those places like iTunes and like that sell only downloads, there's only really 2 places you could get the physical CD. and that's going directly to CD Baby, and also CD Universe. And I don't know how I've used them in the past. I don't know how popular CD Universe is with the people out there. To what extent they know about that. Certainly not as popular as Amazon. They sell movies and music. CD Universe doesn't even do downloads, I don't think. So I don't know how popular they are. I know, like I said, I've purchased from them, and I was surprised they have the CD that they're selling through there. It's supposed to be available any place that sells CDs, but it's kind of iffy. Whether, like, Amazon has decided not to sell them for some reason, I don't know why. So I did finish in late July my Ghost Orchestra piece using what I thought was just strictly orchestral instruments. There's some like a vibraphone in there, which is not necessarily not an orchestra instrument, horn strings and things like that. But you know what? Oddly enough, when I listened back to it, and I did get some feedback from a friend who has it, I also do hear electronic keyboards to some extent, and it's there. And I was surprised because I can remember writing the individual sections, and for each section you choose what instrument you want to play that part, whether it's a flute or a horn or a cello or whatever. And I was quite surprised that, oh yeah, there's elements in there of electronic keyboards mixed in with the orchestral sounding. It's mostly orchestral sounding things. So most of that big long piece is an acoustic, essentially sounding orchestral thing, and then I have that broken up into 7 sections because there's 7 distinct different sections in there. The second piece is something that I actually recorded back in late 2011 and early 2012 when I was making my previous album. Now, my previous album, Impressions of a Year, I put out in April of 2012. So it's been over 5 years since I released my last CD. So you can't say I'm very prolific, especially considering that the only piece that's on this CD that I wrote in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years is the first piece that's 27 minutes. When I was recording my previous CD, which was mostly made up of shorter pieces, I hit on this idea, and I had to take a little side journey to get it recorded while I still remembered what I wanted to do. And I knew that piece, being 24 minutes in length, was not going to make it and not going to be on the previous CD. And I thought, well, I'll save this for the next one, which I did. But I didn't think the next one was going to take over 5 years. And I have this piece called Fog Over the Little Ferry. And it's all electronic in contrast to the first piece, which has mainly orchestral sounds. And that piece, I very much intended on doing a very kind of stagnant piece that has no dynamics. It's 24 minutes. There's no pulse. There's no rhythm. There's no drums. And there's not dynamics. It really doesn't build up and down, and that's intentional. To a lot of people, it would sound like a looped piece where you take, a phrase or a section and you loop it and you have it automatically play, and then you play something over it. It sounds very much like that, but I specifically didn't want to do a looped piece. So for the entire 24 and a half minutes of this piece, you might hear one chord being played on a guitar synthesizer, but I'm actually playing that for the entire duration of the piece. And at times I would have to stop because my hand was cramping, 5-10 minutes into it, whatever, and take a break and go back, pick up where I left off. But all of it's played, and that is a piece for guitar synthesizer only. There's eight guitar synthesizers on there. Very electronic sounding, sounds like synthesizer keyboards, really. There's nothing on there that I think sounds like a guitar. Um, and I just wanted this very long piece that was like the pieces that I like to listen to, where it starts, it arrives, and it stays at that level for the entire duration of the piece. And even though there's 8 parts going on, it's not like there's no baseline rhythm, nothing like that. There's no background, there's no foreground, everything is both. So the idea being you've got these 7 or 8 parts going on simultaneously, and you can focus your attention anywhere you want. So I guess depending on how disciplined your hearing is, you may choose to focus in on something for a while, and then another part, another section, another instrument for a while. And you have no sense of time because there's no sense of time in the piece. There's no building up or building down. There's no rhythm where you get an idea of how much time has passed. And that's what I wanted. I wanted a piece to get lost in. That's what I like to listen to myself. You're in it 5-10 minutes. You have no idea how far into it you are unless you're watching the clock. And it's even something that you could put on repeat and just have that, repeat for hours if you wanted. I like that sense of timelessness to pieces, and to me, the only way to really accomplish that is to not have any kind of rhythms in a piece. So there's no rhythm, so it basically floats, and like I said, there's no foreground, there's no background. There's things that come and go, and little sounds and instruments that come and go, but there's no clear melody, support chords or bass line kind of thing going on there. And usually I accomplished exactly what I set out for, which I was very happy with. It's a simple piece musically. There's no key changes in it or anything, which is intentionally so. That's what I intended and what I wanted to do. Usually when I have a concept for a piece, I start recording it, and something happens during the creation of the piece that drives the piece to go in another direction. So what you come out with was very different than the concept you had. And that's fine, because sometimes the piece drives itself to another conclusion and in another direction. And you still have that original idea that you could go back to and create another piece in. But strangely enough, most of the time when I write a piece, it does go into another direction than what I intended after I start laying parts down. So this is an unusual one that I've waited 5 years to put out, in that it came out exactly what I intended it to be. I don't even know if that's happened before. To have a concept in the beginning, and after you start recording, the concept remained all the way until when it was done and it was over and it was mixed. And I had hell mixing it. It took me probably 40 attempts to get a good mix on it, and I got the best mix I could, and I'm still not 100% happy with it. And the problem is when you have simultaneously anywhere from 6 to 8 sections going on, and you're trying not to highlight any one of those, you kind of all want them to be at an equal volume level. It makes it very difficult. And the volume level does waver a bit in certain instrumental parts and things like that. And because I used old technology, I recorded it on this here, my old Roland unit that I showed. That's all filled up now. And when you record on this, you have to mix live. So it's mixing it into the computer. But I had 8 instruments on 16 channels. So each instrument had a left and a right channel. And I had notes, which I still have here somewhere, that telling me, at minute 13, you have to put, this down to this level. At minute 10, you have to put this up to this level. At minute 14 and a half, you have to move this down here. And at 14 and 53 seconds, move it back up there. It was hell mixing it. When you use which I use the software programs now, you don't have those issues because you don't have to do things like that in real time. You can actually go right to track that you recorded that you need to lower the volume and draw lines and all that. You don't have to do it in real time. So this was a real bear, because sometimes I would get 25, 30 minutes into the piece, not 24, say about 15, 20 minutes into the piece, and something would be too loud, and there's no way to fix that. So I had to start all over again. So it's an album of two sides, of two different style pieces. Also, though, it was recorded in two different places. Now, I've only really lived two different places my whole life. My old home, which, believe it or not, I lived at for 53 years. And this second electronic piece was recorded there in late 2011 and early 2012. And it was one of the last complete pieces I probably recorded there, because I did do a lot of recordings after I finished the Impressions of a Year album, and I put that out in April of 2012. I didn't do a lot of recordings. I was really exhausted from that, from making that album. It took me a year and a half, and so I would dabble, but I don't really recall that I had really done any finished pieces or any real serious pieces that were more than a couple minutes long after that point. So this long piece is really one of the last things I recorded before I moved. I didn't necessarily know I was going to move at that point. And now this other piece that's playing in the background, that was done in the last 2 years, has been done in my new place. So, hence the title Two Views can also be used for that. So, I don't know. I hope it sells better than my last ones did. But in my description box, and this is going much longer than I intended, in my description box, I am going to put in all the links for the places you could buy it, and the people at CD Baby actually have posted all of the tracks from the album which is something they do, on YouTube as individual tracks, and they create basically their own playlist for it, and so you could hear it in full there. So I'm including that link in my description box too, so you can hear all of it on YouTube. And speaking of the electronic piece, this is what's playing now, which means I've already yabbered on for about 27 and a half minutes. I want to do this every video. I'm going to do my random album pull. I have my shelf full of albums. You can see them there. And the spines are not facing me. The open side of the album is facing me, so I can't even read what's on the spine. I'm just going to go and randomly select an album, see what it is, and talk a little bit about my history with the album. Totally at random. Oh, yeah, it's a weird one. Weird one. Look at the price on that for a brand new sealed album. Sidewinder by Morton Subotnick. This is only my second time doing the random album pull. I can remember exactly the store that I bought this in. It was a record chain that doesn't exist anymore. I can remember the mall. I can remember the day I bought it. And this is back in the 80s. This would have been shortly before the advent of the CD. And it's a short album. This is my first introduction to Morton Subotnick. I knew nothing about him, I don't think, at the time. I may have heard the name, knew he was an avant-garde musician. It's called Sidewinder. There's a picture of a snake on, and one of the reasons why there's a picture of a rattlesnake is it starts off with the sound effect of essentially sounds like an electronic sizzling of a rattlesnake, a rattling. Created by Morton Subotnick on the Electric Music Box, Columbia Stereo Masterworks. Now, if I didn't know anything about Morton Subotnick, and the only tracks are Sidewinder Part 1, Sidewinder Part 2, there's enough liner notes. This is why I love old albums. The liner notes told me enough about what kind of music this was that made me buy it. Talking about his concept of synthesized music and electronic music. It talked about Silver Apples of the Moon. And it says no year on it, but I know that this is, I want to say, and I don't know if the notes even mention the year. I want to say this is early 70s, late 60s. I know this has, I think, fairly recently been reissued on CD, which I haven't picked up yet, but I will. Yeah, there's no year on this either. Side 1, Side 2. Short. Side 1's 14 minutes and 30 seconds. Side 2 is 14 minutes and 7 seconds. So I know when they reissued it on CD recently, there's a whole second album on there. Very much out there. I was pleasantly surprised, but also a little surprised. I'm so glad I picked this one out. Because there's not really, you don't really hear any chord changes on it. This is fairly experimental electronic sound effects kind of thing. And I don't know if you could see him at the, it's a great picture of him at the unit itself. You know, with all the cables and everything that go in there. And wonderful, you know, sometimes, well, for the price, for $2.99 for a brand new sealed album, the liner notes alone are, I think, worth $3. It gives you a lot of history. And that's the one thing I like about quote-unquote serious music is they tell you a lot about the music and about the composer and about the intent behind the album. I was a little shocked that it was as out there as it is. And this just reminds me that I do have to pick this up on CD because my turntable doesn't really work. But I'm glad I picked this. This is my second random pick. Sidewinder, Morton Subotnick. Okay, guys, I've gone on probably for a half hour and I didn't mean to. And I'll be back with more Tales from the Garage soon. And I won't be talking just about me next time, I promise.